Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've always been close to my family, but living across the country means visits are rare. The holidays are our time to reconnect, so no matter how chaotic travel gets, I make the trip every year. This year, the travel gods were not on my side. What should have been a simple connecting flight turned into a nightmare when winter storms rolled through and threw the entire airline system into disarray. My first flight was cancelled completely. The airline staff tried to help, but their computer system was down, which meant they couldn't book me a hotel for the night. So there I was, curled up on the cold airport floor, clutching my bags like a homeless person, watching the occasional janitor pass by, as I tried to get some sleep. By the time I finally got on a plane the next day, I had spent a full 24 hours in the airport. I was exhausted, irritable, and desperately in need of comfort. Thank God I had splurged on a first-class ticket for this leg of the journey. It would be worth every penny just to have a comfortable seat and some peace. I settled into my plush seat, feeling relief wash over me as I realized I was finally on my way home. There was an empty seat beside me, which was an added bonus, extra space to stretch out during the flight. A flight attendant approached me with a sympathetic smile. She was probably in her mid-30s, with a kind face that showed she genuinely cared about passenger comfort. She politely asked if I would mind moving to economy so a mother and her toddler could have my seat and the empty one next to me, as the mother had forgotten to book a ticket for her child. I felt a pang of guilt, but after my hellish 24 hours, I just couldn't bring myself to give up the comfort I had paid extra for. I apologized and explained that I'd had an incredibly long day and had paid extra for the seat specifically because I needed the comfort, hoping she would understand. The flight attendant was very understanding and assured me it wasn't a problem at all. I felt relieved by her response. What happened next, though, made me wish I'd taken the economy seat after all. The flight attendant allowed the woman to sit in the empty seat next to me with her toddler on her lap. As soon as she sat down, she gave me a nasty look. She couldn't believe that I wouldn't trade my seat for a child. I was taken aback by her attitude. I hadn't done anything wrong. I explained to her that I had paid extra for my seat and that she should have booked a ticket for her child, emphasizing that this situation wasn't my fault. She immediately started muttering things under her breath. I could hear every word, though she was pretending to talk to her toddler. She complained about selfish people who don't care about children and only care about themselves. Then she looked directly at her toddler and said something that made my blood boil. She told her child that they could make all the noise they wanted and do whatever they wanted because it didn't matter. She was deliberately trying to make my flight miserable because I wouldn't give up the seat I had paid for. The muttering continued for several minutes, with occasional glares thrown my way. After spending a night on an airport floor and 24 hours of travel hell, my patience had worn dangerously thin. I finally snapped and told her to shut up, using an expletive that I immediately regretted, not because the woman didn't deserve it, but because there was a child present. I quickly apologized for swearing in front of her child, acknowledging that it was inappropriate. The woman responded by calling me names, not even trying to censor herself in front of her own child. Yet I was the bad guy. She continued her tirade, getting louder and more aggressive by the minute. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, my savior appeared. The same flight attendant who had been so understanding earlier came back over to our seats and crouched down to the woman's eye level. She told the woman that she was lucky to get switched seats at all, and that since being seated, all the flight attendant had heard was the woman threatening me and encouraging her child to be disruptive. The flight attendant warned that the plane hadn't left the gate yet, and they had no problem removing her from the flight. She added that if this behavior continued during the flight, the woman would be banned from flying with them again. The woman's face turned bright red. Well, she finally shut up. I couldn't help the smile that crept across my face as I pulled out my tablet and opened up my downloaded episodes of Sex Life on Netflix. I turned up the volume just enough and enjoyed the steamy show right in front of her, feeling a small sense of petty revenge. The remainder of the flight was blissfully quiet, and I finally made it home to my family for the holidays. My nephew had been living with me for about 8 months. My sister was deployed overseas, and as her only sibling without kids of my own, I became the default guardian. The transition wasn't easy for either of us. A 12-year-old boy suddenly living with his aunt, who had zero experience with kids, recipe for disaster. But we made it work. He struggled with the change at first, new school, new home, missing his mom. His grades took a hit and I could see how much it bothered him. So I made him a deal. Ace the next round of exams and I'd get him that new gaming system he'd been eyeing for months. The kid worked his butt off. Every night after dinner, he'd be at the kitchen table with his books. No complaints, no procrastination. When his report card came in with straight A's, I've never seen a smile so big. I was so proud of him that I decided we'd go to Walmart that very weekend to pick out his reward. It was the worst possible time to go shopping, 2 weeks before Christmas, and the place was absolute mayhem. People pushing carts like battering rams, kids screaming, holiday music blaring. My nephew was practically vibrating with excitement. I told my nephew that we should head to the electronics section, mentioning it should be back that way. He excitedly responded that he thought it was down this aisle and asked if we could hurry. We were navigating through the crowded grocery section, trying to find a shortcut to electronics. My nephew was a few steps ahead, practically bouncing with each step when he accidentally bumped into a woman standing in the middle of the condiment aisle. It wasn't a hard collision, just a light bump as he tried to squeeze past, and he immediately turned to apologize. He politely told the woman he was really sorry and that he didn't see her there. But instead of accepting his apology, this woman, mid-30s, phone mounted on some kind of selfie stick, turned and glared at him like he'd just committed a felony. I noticed she was recording herself with her phone. The woman rudely asked if he had just ruined her video. My nephew looked confused and a bit scared. He started to apologize again, saying he was just trying to get through and didn't mean to do anything wrong. The woman then angrily explained that he had no idea how many takes it had taken her to get this segment right, and told us that the video was going out to 20,000 followers. I stepped closer, putting my hand on my nephew's shoulder. I pointed out that he had apologized, it was an accident, and suggested we all move on. That's when things went from bad to worse. Without warning, this woman grabbed a bottle of yellow mustard from the shelf and squirted it directly at my nephew, hitting him across his chest and face. She nastily suggested that maybe next time he would watch where he was going. My nephew froze in shock, yellow mustard dripping down his favorite hoodie, the one his mom had sent him from overseas. His eyes welled up with tears and something in me just snapped. Before I could even process what I was doing, my right fist connected with Karen's jaw. It wasn't a wild swing. It was focused, direct, and way more effective than I expected. She dropped like a sack of potatoes, her phone clattering to the floor beside her. The aisle went silent. My nephew stared at me with his mouth open. I stood there looking at my fist in shock, wondering if I'd just earned myself an assault charge. A small crowd had gathered, and I was certain someone was calling security. I put my arm around my mustard-covered nephew. I apologized to my nephew, telling him I didn't know what came over me. With wide eyes, he asked me if I had just knocked her out. I admitted that I had and acknowledged that I shouldn't have done that. A woman from the next aisle over approached us. She told us that she had seen the whole thing and that Karen had assaulted my boy first. She affirmed that I was just defending him. Then another shopper chimed in. This person mentioned they had the whole incident on video, confirming that Karen had attacked a child and I had only reacted. Security arrived moments later, followed by the store manager. I was sure we were about to be escorted out and possibly handed over to the police. Instead, after reviewing security footage and witness statements, the manager looked genuinely apologetic. The store manager apologized on behalf of Walmart for what happened to who he assumed was my son. I corrected him, explaining that he was my nephew. The manager continued, saying what Karen did was completely unacceptable and told us they had already called the police who would want statements from both of us. Karen was coming to, holding her jaw and demanding that I be arrested. The security guards were helping her to her feet but didn't seem sympathetic. The manager turned to my nephew, who was still trying to wipe mustard from his eyes. He asked the boy if he understood that he was looking for the gaming section. The manager suggested that while we got this sorted out, my nephew could come with him, implying they could find something to make this right. My nephew looked at me for permission, and I nodded. While security dealt with Karen and we waited for police, the manager personally escorted us to electronics after my nephew cleaned up in the bathroom. He insisted on giving my nephew the exact gaming system he wanted, complete with an extra controller and 2 games, at no charge. By the time we left, Karen was being led out in handcuffs, still shouting about her social media followers and how she was going to sue everyone. Turns out, assaulting a minor with condiments is frowned upon by law enforcement. On the drive home, my nephew was quiet, clutching his new game system. My nephew softly asked if I was in trouble. I reassured him that I wasn't, explaining that the police said it was self-defense. He was attacked, and I reacted. He told me that what I did was the coolest thing he'd ever seen. He mentioned that his mom always said I was tough, but admitted he didn't know I could throw a punch like that. I just laughed, even though my hand was throbbing. I suggested we not tell his mom about this part and definitely not make a habit of it. He smiled and nodded, then looked down at his stained hoodie. He asked if I thought we could get the mustard out. I assured him that if not, we'd get him a new one, saying it was no big deal. But it was a big deal. That night, as I scrubbed yellow stains from fabric, I realized that being a parent, or an aunt standing in for one, means protecting your kid, even if that protection comes in the form of a right hook to an entitled woman's jaw. So, let me tell you about this absolutely bizarre thing that happened to me a few years ago. It's one of those stories that I just can't forget because of how ridiculous the whole situation was. I was 19 at the time and my family had decided to take a vacation to Disney World. We were staying at one of the Disney resorts, but on our first night we had dinner reservations at a different hotel restaurant that was pretty far from where we were staying. The restaurant was just a casual buffet place, nothing fancy or requiring any special dress code. So I wore what I normally would, a pair of comfortable shorts and a graphic t-shirt with a unicorn on it that said "Everything sucks" in glittery cursive writing. We got to the restaurant with no issues. Nobody at the entrance said anything about my shirt, and we were seated right away. The food was good, and everything was going fine. About halfway through our meal, I got up to get a second plate of food from the buffet. That's when it happened. When I was walking toward the buffet, this woman, probably in her 40s, physically stepped in front of me to block my path. Before I could even react, she started yelling right in my face. She loudly questioned if I thought my clothing was appropriate for a family restaurant. I just stood there completely confused. I had no idea what she was talking about at first. I asked her what she meant and she angrily pointed at my shirt, calling it obscene and inappropriate. She claimed her children were distressed by it. I looked over to where she was pointing and saw her kids sitting at a table all the way on the other side of the restaurant. They didn't look distressed at all. They were just eating their dinner and not even looking in our direction. I tried to defend myself, explaining that my shirt just said, "Everything sucks," and wasn't really that bad. She responded by calling it disgusting language and demanded that I take it off right then and there. I told her I couldn't just remove my shirt in the middle of a busy restaurant, as that would be far more inappropriate than what I was currently wearing. She then instructed me to go to the gift shop and buy something family-friendly instead. She specifically suggested I should get a Disney princess shirt or something with Minnie Mouse on it, insisting that's what I should be wearing and what her children would prefer to see. By this point, other diners were starting to stare, and I felt my face getting hot from embarrassment. I explained to her that I wasn't there to dress for her children's benefit, and that if there had been a problem with my shirt, the restaurant staff would have mentioned it when we checked in. She became even more furious, saying I was being disrespectful because we were at Disney World where everything should be child-friendly. She threatened to report me to management. I told her that was her choice, but I was going to continue getting my food. When I tried to step around her, she moved to block me again. She refused to let me pass until I changed my vulgar shirt. She went on about how much money she had spent to bring her family there and that they shouldn't have to see what she called trash like my shirt. At this point, I'd had enough. I told her that I didn't care how much she had spent, as it didn't give her the right to harass other guests or dictate their clothing choices. I made it clear I wouldn't be changing my shirt and just wanted to enjoy the rest of my dinner peacefully. I finally managed to walk around her and went to the buffet to fill my plate. The entire time I could hear her behind me, still shouting about how disrespectful I was and how she was going to get me thrown out. A few other guests were giving her disapproving looks, and eventually a staff member came over to speak with her. I didn't hear their conversation, but when I walked back to my table, she was being escorted back to her own table by a manager. She glared at me the whole way, but at least she stopped yelling. For the rest of the meal, she kept shooting dirty looks in my direction, but she didn't approach me again. We finished our dinner a bit more quickly than planned and left. As we were walking out, I noticed her complaining to a different manager, pointing at me and gesturing wildly. When we were leaving, I saw another teenager walk in wearing a shirt with much more explicit language than mine. I wonder if that poor kid got ambushed too. My husband and I have been together for about 15 years. For most of that time, we kept very limited contact with his family. Despite living in the same city, I probably only met his mother 3 or 4 times over more than a decade. We had our own lives, our own routines, our peace and quiet. That all changed 2 years ago when we got a call from Adult Protective Services. His mother was in the hospital, and when they went to get her, the apartment she shared with her daughter was in such terrible condition that they refused to release her back there. The social workers seemed relieved when they found out she had a son. We just agreed to take her in. I still wonder why we didn't explore alternatives. So we moved her in with us, and it's been absolute hell ever since. She's incredibly entitled and narcissistic. Her income is minimal, yet she spends about half her monthly income on cigarettes. We just love smelling that all the time. When we first took her in, she was pretty frail and it was winter, so we let her smoke in the garage. That was a massive mistake that turned into a giant tantrum when we finally put a stop to it. I suppose she's lucky in some ways. She gets Medicare fully paid for by the state and receives some food stamps, and we don't charge her anything to live with us. Not a single penny for rent, utilities, or anything else. But she's a complete slob. She's probably taken 5 or 6 showers in the entire 2 years she's been living with us. She never cleans up after herself and frequently acts like a child, throwing tantrums over the smallest things. Just last week, she ran out of chocolate muffins that she likes. Mind you, we still had cake and other snacks in the pantry, but that wasn't good enough. She complained that she would have to go without, as usual. When I told her we'd get more when we went shopping the next day, she complained that was a whole day away and that she never got what she wanted in our house. This from the woman whose medications we make sure she gets, who always has food even when her food stamps run out, and who we drive to all her medical appointments, some of which are 90 miles away. Today I took her to meet with a social worker about Section 8 housing. The social worker explained that she would have to pay 30 to 40% of her income toward the rent, with a housing voucher covering the rest. My mother-in-law reacted with outrage, claiming they were going to take all her money and asking how she was supposed to live. I sat there, my blood absolutely boiling. This woman has been living in our house completely free for 2 years, and now she's complaining about having to pay something, anything, toward her own basic needs. I couldn't hold back anymore. I pointed out that she'd been living in our house for free for 2 years without paying a cent for rent, utilities, or transportation. She responded that she was family and that made it different. I told her that being family didn't mean she got a free ride forever, and that my husband and I had lives too that we'd put on hold to take care of her. I gave her 2 options. Either get approved for Section 8 and move into her own place, where she'd have to act like an adult and take responsibility, or go live with her daughter. I made it clear that the free ride at our house was coming to an end. For once, she was speechless. 3 weeks later, she was approved for a small studio apartment. My husband and I helped her move in, set up the bare necessities, and then handed her the keys. I walked out of that apartment feeling like I could breathe again for the first time in 2 years. My husband squeezed my hand as we got into the car and thanked me for putting up with his mother for as long as I did. It wasn't easy, but as we drove away, I knew we'd done more than enough. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.